Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm a social studies educator, historian, and host of this, the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. I'm also an avid collector of popular culture artifacts. I love what I find at thrift store outlets, garage sale leftovers, and what I spot just making my way around the built world. I enjoy sorting through boxes of free books and magazines, not to mention online collections like Internet Archive, and of course the Library of Congress. But you don't need to spend your time digging through bins or following online rabbit holes to get a look into the past. The movies and TV we watch, the books we read, and the games we play are all documents of the past. So is fashion, food, music, toys, even the roads we travel on and the places we live and work in. Everything is a primary source. This podcast is the result of exhibiting these kinds of artifacts in public, getting passersby to select an item they connect with, and then chatting with me to see what it says about the time, place, and people who made it. The conversation you are about to hear, therefore, is your history, my history, our history, through popular culture. A note about this episode. You'll hear me refer to the subject item as a cameo more than once during the conversation, even getting my guest to use the term, instead of her more accurate description of a profile portrait. Cameos are usually jewelry with embossed faces, while this item is a silhouette portrait. Now, with this correction in mind, let's hear what this piece can tell us about time and place. So, Lenore, I mean, this is pretty exciting. It's your first podcast you've ever done. When you woke up this morning, did you thought you would be doing a podcast?
Absolutely not. And I listen to podcasts a
So
lot.
you'll be able to listen to yourself soon. And hopefully people will be able to take what you have to say and consider it and maybe add to the conversation.
Exactly.
So what from my collection leaped out to you?
I immediately was drawn to this Walt Disney World portrait.
Yeah.
But it's in black and white. And I don't even know what it's called, like a profile.
Yeah, this cameo, kind of thing. And so you've been to Walt Disney World a few times, or?
Actually, I went as a child, 12 years old. My family, my mom, dad, I'm the oldest, sister, brother, we all got one of these.
Oh, neat.
And so you sit in a profile and they etch it out, on the black paper and put it on the white background.
If I'm imagining where in the park this is, was it on the main street, kind of near the entrance?
Yes.
Main Street USA?
Sure.
Because it definitely fits the motif. It's like forever 1915 in that part of the park.
Right. And what's interesting, this brought me back to my childhood. So we're talking the 70s. Mm-hmm. And so I haven't been back in years. Would this still be there as an experience?
I was actually just there at Christmas time, and I recognized immediately that there's a concerted effort by Disney to preserve as much of the original facade as possible, while at the same time bringing in some pretty incredible new, very high-tech rides and experiences. But it seems like, if we're talking historic preservation,
right,
and it seems weird to talk about Orlando, Florida, and Disney World in particular as being historically minded,
right,
it really does seem like they're trying their hardest to keep that section of the park, Main Street USA, pretty much consistent. That being said, I don't think you can still get these done.
I would be surprised, but I think you bring up a good point, is that it has to be a blend over generations. Something that I experienced in the 70s is going to change in the 80s, is going to change in the aughts and so forth. Mm-hmm. And, as technology has grown, so does their experiences. To me, this is an experience, and it's a souvenir.
Right. And so much, and so we're at the Ephemera Fair right now, and so much of what we have around us, a lot of it is souvenir related.
Sure.
And the definition of ephemera or ephemeral means that it's not meant to be lasting a long time. Do you still have
Yes.
yours of this?
Yes, we do.
Because you saw it as a connection to a memory and something that you wanted to. I found this at a Goodwill outlet, just kind of folded in with a bunch of other stuff,
Sure.
and I couldn't say no to it because it's just such a. This one's from 1986, so we have evidence that they continued doing that at least into the 80s.
Sure.
But it's for some folks, this is just as disposable as, I don't know, a letter or something
Yeah,
like that.
sure.
It's hard to say, but what ideas or behavior does this? Because cameos were really popular early 20th, late 19th, early 20th century.
Sure.
They weren't in the 1970s a very
No.
common thing. So from the start, the Magic Kingdom was meant to be a updated version of the California Disneyland park.
Right.
And Disney World as a whole was going to be kind of like the next version of the experience.
Exactly.
Why do you think that they had these things, cameo making, as part of the experience? If they're looking forward to the future, why do you think they have something so old-timey?
Well, I think it has to go back to their origin. They had to start someplace in order to make a connection, and for people to come back to. So that's the preservation part of it, and utilizing influences of that time. Walt Disney might have had an affinity for cameos, or their marketing group and so forth. Be like, what we need? I keep calling them experiences. Because we went and sat down for it. There was another booth where we could go and dress up in old Western garb and took a picture. So those were experiences of that time, whereas now you can be part of a Star Wars.
Right. And so they've become very much the, and I've always said, because I've done a few podcasts about Disney features of the park, movies, things like that. And it seems like there's a bit of a hiccup that happened after Walt died. And that they may have kind of lost their way for a short period and weren't really sure where to focus. There was even, I think at one point, maybe in the 80s, the company debated, let's shelve the movies. Like, let's stop making movies. Let's just focus entirely on the parks because they're generating the revenue for us.
Exactly.
Because like some of the movies in the 80s weren't very good. And
Right.
Nobody watched them. And I suppose since, the Florida project, as they called Disney World before it opened, was the ultimate in Walt Disney's creation. Like, he worked on that for a solid decade, scouting out land in Florida, trying to figure out. He considered opening it in St. Louis originally because that was
I didn't
more
know that.
central,
Oh,
and he figured, because one of the big drawbacks of the California park was that it really was out of reach for a good half of the country.
Sure.
That most of the East Coast wasn't about to go, because they couldn't afford air travel and stuff, and so you'd have to take a whole road trip. And so he figured if I put it more central, then everybody would be able to go to the next one. But then Florida was so affordable, the land in Central Florida, that's what he settled on. So there's 2 parks for each coast. More Europeans will go to the Florida park and so forth and so on. But it was his vision, it was his project, and it was also a chance for them to make improvements upon the Disneyland experience. I feel like this is evidence of, here's what worked in California, we'll keep that.
Right.
But let's
But
see what
build
we
on
can do.
Sure. Well, and he was a complete innovator. I watched a whole documentary on him, and he was innovative. He was a taskmaster, perfectionist, and those early Mickey Mouse, cartoon, Cinderella, and so forth. If you think about it, he had integrated music. It was the caricatures of the time, which evolved. And then he's like, well, wait a second, I want a park, just like you talked about. Then there were the movies, but they're kind of had a, a silent, it kind of stopped at some point. And then they bought or merged with ABC, so now there's different content. So that's the background I have, is all about content. And how do you reach people? Is it in person? Are you viewing it? Are you taking away memorabilia that you can look at 20 years later?
And people even will describe themselves as Disney families, and have some kind of symbology. Like, this does not scream Disney. It doesn't scream it at all, because at the very bottom
is very small.
You don't see it nice and big. There's not like mouse ears put on the kid's head or anything silly like that. It's just very subtle Walt Disney World, and it has a script that looks like the Coca-Cola symbol. It's not.
Yes.
And
I never thought of it that way.
And that's another brand that comes from. I feel like this roots all the way back to the first quarter of the 20th century. That's where people like your Walt Disneys, his generation. I hate to say it, but he wasn't unique among them. There was a lot of innovators. There was a lot of people who, because wasn't he a World War I veteran, or did he come of age in that? I know he was like a young man.
Of that age,
Like late 20s is when Disney first showed up as a media company, and producing cartoons and things like that. And his, like you said, the perfectionism. Whenever they have like a new ride going up at Disney World, I remember being there early 2000s or so. That was the first time I ever went, when I was actually an adult. And they had, with all of the stuff that they were building, quotes from Walt. Like, once you have an idea, you dog it, you don't forget about it, you get it done.
Right.
Just kind of like showing us, like, he might not be with us anymore, but his vision still is. His process. And that's a process that's rooted very deeply in the innovation of the early 20th century. He's carrying it on, and as a tiny little reminder of that, we have these cameos as a souvenir in the 70s and the 80s to get people themselves connected to that. And like I said, Coca-Cola, same thing. Like, remember New Coke?
Yeah, yes, of course.
Same time period as this was cameos made. Maybe this kid looks so depressed because
he's drinking the New Coke.
Actually, he's only 7 months old, so hopefully he's not drinking any kind of Coke. But for a 7-month-old, he's holding his neck up pretty well.
Very good.
So, but the New Coke thing. Remember when they repackaged the Coke cans and it just said Coke on it, and then they realized that not only was the recipe terrible, but it was not selling, and a lot of it had to do with people not really recognizing it. When you have that script, the Coca-Cola and the cursive, that's late 19th century. That's so classic looking, and they even added that word, Coca-Cola classic.
Classic, right?
Just to people that weren't even alive anywhere close to there are like, well, that was a time period where they knew what they were doing.
Right. And the New Coke was deviated from that.
Yeah.
And, going back to what you were saying is Walt Disney, his philosophy is kind of the foundation of all the innovations over time. Like, it resonates. And just like he said, like little quotes of his to remind the innovators of today what he created.
Yeah, and you were mentioning content before. I mean, it's standard now. Whenever you watch a movie or TV show made by Disney, it always starts with the castle. And I believe it's the Disney World castle.
It is.
I think it's Cinderella's, not Sleeping Beauty's. But it's that. So it's like Walt Disney World. Even though Walt wasn't alive to see it, it was still his baby, right? It still came from him. And so to go along with that concept of reminding his employees, the company, and all of us at large, hey, he's still with us. Don't deviate from
Right.
what we've been doing. So I'm so glad that this little cameo
You brought me back in time, and I am excited to follow your podcast. I think this is a way to talk about, ephemera that brings us different memories. Like this piece of ephemera spoke to me, but it might not speak to other people and elicit different.
That's why
reactions.
I have such a wide assortment of things.
It's beautiful, and I thank you for, walking me down memory lane.
Well, that's what we just did. Is we made an oral history, and that's what it's all about.
Well,
Lenore, thank you so much for joining me here at the Everything's a Primary Source podcast, or I should say better, the EPS podcast, where everything, including cameos from Walt Disney World, is a primary source.
Great.
Popular culture, by definition, connects and unites us, and proves that people of different backgrounds, in fact, have a lot in common with one another. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, at least in part, for that reason. If it connects with you and you'd like to add to it, or any of the podcast episodes, just visit everything-history.com and search for the Everything's a Primary Source project, which can be found in the classroom section of the website. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Be sure to rate and share this podcast wherever you are listening to it now, and follow Everything as a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.